Oops, all watery graves has a player.
There's some steam vents. You know, I'm doing the check. This is actually I'm a kind of a Grixis fan myself. No blood crypt. There is a Raucous Theater though.
That's just showing respect.
Yes.
How often do you need the untapped blood crypt in this deck?
Right. Yeah, you want it to be fetchable. On the topic of fetchable, here is a Polluted Delta for a turn 1 Tamiyo, shocking in a Watery Grave, as you said. For Madsen, we have a turn 1 Ragavan. That's going to be off of a shocked Sacred Foundry, both players at 17.
Really just two of the defining 1-drops of the Horizon sets.
Yes. 2-1 versus 0-3. You could argue this favors Tamiyo.
Right, it introduces the question, do you attack with Tamiyo for Burkhart? And I think a lot of that's going to come down to the texture of Burkhart's hand.
I imagine both players would like to have a removal spell right now.
Right.
Darkslick Shores is land number 2. Tamiyo's attacking.
I mean, I like the attack here from Burkhart. Tamiyo dying is kind of a canon event. Right, so this is Burkhart kind of knowing how this one goes and playing around it.
Canon event meaning there's no way to get away from it, of course. So here's a clue token. Mana up, passing turn. This is Corey Burkhart's comfort zone. Orcish Bowmaster is the natural predator of Ragavan.
Everyone knows that.
Yes, another piece of canon, another piece of magic lore for you.
It's not a cannon, it's actually a bow and arrow. But like you got the spirit.
Wielded by an orc army. Here is Galvanic Discharge. So both players did have the removal spell, but that early exchange looks like advantage Burkhart to me, as here is Osla Pride for Benton Madsen.
Right, this is a spot where Orcish Bowmasters is a card that did a lot right with the release of Pro Tour Lord of the Rings, right? We saw it do a ton at that tournament. But it's kind of taken a bit more of a backseat as there's sort of more combo going on in Modern. It is so strong in these fair games that are about creatures.
You see just that Ocelot Pride, another creature that is very vulnerable to Orcish Bowmasters. 3 copies in Burkhart's deck list this weekend as we see a Scalding Tarn finding a Steam Vents. Burkhart to 14 and not too concerned about the life total. Lightning Bolt takes care of Ocelot Pride and the Orc and the army rumble across.
I really appreciate that there are Modern decks that want Galvanic Discharge and there are Modern decks that want Lightning Bolt. That's just really cool texture and speaks to how large the card pool is.
Much love to Corey Burkhart bringing lightning bolts. That's going to be my rooting interest in that affair, but I completely agree seeing both on the spread. A good sign for the format.
Madsen notably on 1 copy of Seasoned Pyromancer and 4 Fables, which really nice to have the split cutting that way against a bunch of Bowmasters from Burkhart's deck.
Yes, you would hate to Seasoned Pyromancer into Orcish Bowmasters. Undoes your work pretty quickly. Windswept Heath is land number 3 for Madsen. Gonna give this one a think.
Right, this is that spot that you kind of talked about earlier in the day, where this being a closed deck list event, you don't actually know if Burkhart is on removal spells, counter spells, what the mix looks like, and you really are kind of having to try and figure out what it is you want to play around.
2 blue mana or 2 black mana represented there for Burkhart. There are 4 counter spell proper in the spread. Probably wouldn't be too surprising for Madsen to have that face up, as the spell attempted is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. That one does resolve. Here comes the Goblin Shaman token. And kind of we were alluding to, I don't think we'll be doing too much rummaging with Chapter 2 against that Orcish Bowmaster.
I mean, there is the nice spot where, theoretically, Madsen could even untap, discharge the Bowmaster with the trigger on the stack, and then still get that bit of value.
True. Burkhart cracks that clue as we go back his way. Life total's tied at 14. Psychic Frog added to the mix.
Oh, my son.
A fair Psychic Frog. We see those up to a lot more cheaty stuff in the format, but Corey Burkhart is, of course, on the trademark pretty fair Grixis deck this weekend.
Look, the card is meant to just be halfway between Psychotog, right, and Shadow Mage Infiltrator, which is just a pretty nice Thieving Magpie in a fair sense.
Halfway between those cards?
Yeah, halfway.
half the mana of each of them? And
between both those cards, yeah.
back to Benton Madsen. See a draw for turn. Some thinking about that Chapter 2. You were mentioning the possibility of maybe killing the Bowmaster and then doing some rummaging.
Right. Notably, Madsen has not rolled this die up to Chapter 2 yet on Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which implies that he is having a bit of a think during his draw step.
Definitely makes a lot of sense to take your time, be a bit deliberate. There's Chapter 2. Flage discarded. Makes sense to give that one a think. It's good to have in the graveyard, but that does mean you're giving up that Bowmaster trigger. Ooh, and main deck Cling to Dust.
Whoa!
There are 2 of those in Burkhardt's deck this weekend. I understand why you wouldn't play around that one, but that is disastrous, and that is happening here before Madsen's able to escape that Flage.
That's so sick, right? And just like you're saying, because there was that Orcish Bowmaster trigger on the stack, you can't just cast the Flage there. Where normally, if Madsen theoretically, say, had an untapped red source, he would have the opportunity to escape the Flage before Burkhardt could cast that Cling to Dust because of how turn player priority and all of that works. But again, that trigger being on the stack for Burkhardt was crucial.
Yeah, really good call. If that was just Madsen, you know, there's no Bowmaster trigger, just goes right to the main phase that he's already in, makes a land drop, there comes Flage. Goblin Shaman rumbling across. A couple good blockers for Burkhardt here. You got to imagine that Madsen is pretty much valuing the treasure token with this attack.
Yep. 2/2's trade.
We'll see what the follow-up is for Madsen. That Cling to Dust exiling creature also notable as Burkhardt is at 17.
Right, and that's the type of thing where normally Madsen really wants to try and be the aggressor in this sort of matchup because he doesn't have as many cards like Psychic Frog that are going to help him sort of snowball an advantage in the same way that Tomio might be able to. Most ways that Madsen is able to accrue cardboard are also reducing Burkhardt's life total. Those are things like Ragavan, those are things like Ajani, but he doesn't really have anything like that going yet.
Fetching a shock for Madsen. Madsen down to 10. Very much the player on the back foot in this affair so far.
Something you've noted is that Flage can make up a life difference.
Yes. And there's a tap of 3. And it's going to be another Flage. Actually targeting the Psychic Frog. That's interesting. Like Burkhardt with 2 cards in hand, it looks like.
Yeah, this is a spot where it is basically saying, hey, Corey, do you think your 2 cards in hand or your Psychic Frog are worth more?
It's also the threat of a Galvanic Discharge follow-up.
Right, this introduces the really interesting puzzle. Does Corey think that Benton was bluffing?
Right.
During the draw step earlier on maybe pretending to have Galvanic Discharge here?
We were covering Amulet Titan in round 1. That's our chess of magic. This is our poker as Burkhardt's going to call. There's discard both cards to make the Frog a 3/4. Madsen up to 13 from the Flage.
Okay. Still 2 mana back for Madsen. You can see Burkhardt thumbing Cling to Dust to the front.
And Ajani is the follow-up. Burkhardt paid off for saving that Frog.
Really big deal, especially with all of these cards in the graveyard that can help it jump.
Right, back Burkhardt's way. Draw for turn. Looks like we're thinking about jumping the Frog. A little bit of tension there, but I think that the tipping point why you're not seeing value in cards in graveyard for Cling to Dust is that would take 4 mana. Burkhardt does not have that.
Right, it's really hard. With this Cling to Dust does want to go after Flage, but if Burkhardt is able to find a counterspell or something, that's good enough as well.
There's the jump, there's the attack, and wow! The other Cling to Dust is going to answer that other Flage.
It is a cantrip with a lot of versatility. It's the type of card where you go, wow, he really must mean it. But also, it's not like the opportunity cost of this card is that high.
Yes. And also, we're talking about trying to attack a metagame with this Grixis Midrange deck, right? This is not a stock deck. This is Corey Burkhardt preparing for this weekend. You have to imagine Boros Energy is one of the strongest considerations in his crosshairs.
And it's so interesting because the deck that he's attacking is one that is just a bunch of great standalone threats, which is historically not the type of thing that Grixis has been that great against, but it looks like most of what Burkhardt has been doing has actually been lining up somewhat favorably with Madsen's deck.
Yeah, things coming together well so far as we're back to Madsen, the reflection of Kiki Jiki now on the battlefield. 4 mana up, there's an Ajani. No attacks, no plays. Back to Corey Burkhardt with that active Psychic Frog. This is looking pretty good for Corey Burkhardt.
Right, this is a spot where basically we're going to see the token on Madsen's side saying, you probably don't want to let me have this Ajani transform into a Planeswalker.
And now with some cards in hand, Burkhardt not even jumping the Frog. Psychic Frog and Tamiyo attacking. Crack of the Clue.
Okay, so this is basically just making sure that the Frog is really the thing that this is the way that you want to jump it. Because sometimes, say Burkhardt were to draw a removal spell, he might want to let Madsen go ahead, chump block with the token, and then with the Ajani trigger on the stack say, no, hold on. I'm killing that too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, get the extra card, jump still before blockers. The Frog grown now to 4.
Whoa, is Madsen looking at doing something with Ajani? This is interesting. Okay. I love the discard to the Frog here. This is I would say a proclamation from Burkhardt that, quote-unquote, flashing back Cling to Dust is not what this game is about.
There's another discard, the Frog up to 5. That's half of Madsen's life total. And there's the draw trigger off the Frog. Tamiyo transforms and pluses.
Okay. I mean, that's half of Madsen's life. Madsen is facing lethal now.
Yes.
And this is a 6 toughness Psychic Frog, so it's unlikely Ajani's going to be able to take it down.
Right, with no plays last turn, no answers to the Frog. It's going to take something pretty special for Madsen here. Fatal Push there, enabled by the transformation of the Tamiyo, taking care of the reflection as well.
Holy... Okay.
Burkhardt really showing Grixis mages how it's done here.
This is that balance of pressure and cards. Right? This is not necessarily Burkhardt doing the sort of Grixis control-y, I'm going to bury you in cards over a long game. This is him threading a needle and saying, no, I'm going to use exactly all of my resources to kill you the turn before you can stabilize.
Mm-hmm. Notably, a lot of those resources going into growing the Frog, but, you know, that counts. They mattered against the Flage.
I was about to say, you're telling Madsen. I mean, if anything, something that Psychic Frog does is it gives every piece of cardboard that you have access to a sort of fungibility, where you're able to convert it into a resource that always matters, right? Either it is going to mean the Psychic Frog is going to survive more removal than it normally could, or in a case like this, it actually just contributes to your closing speed.
Madsen staring down lethal, very possibly the last turn of the game for him. What can he do? Here's the backup Ajani, going to transform the first copy. Get a cat.
Normally, the way that we see Ajani become a Planeswalker is from him seeing his brother Jazal die, not from seeing himself die.
My understanding of time travel, continuity, and stories in that space is seeing yourself would be pretty horrifying. So this does make sense to me.
I would hate that. Yeah, I feel that.
Here's a dash of Regavan. That's our red permanent for Ajani, who will 0. There's a 4th creature. Bit of a question of where to point the damage. It's going to be at Orcish Bowmasters.
So this is interesting. I think what we're seeing is Madsen doing a sort of Hail Mary and hope to see Ragavan flip over something like a Fatal Push.
That would be ideal, but Kaito is not going to be it. I think you're exactly right, though. I think Fatal Push was the real hope here, as you see Madsen pick up the cards.
Right, that's a spot where Madsen's kind of identifying, yes, I am behind, but we've talked about turning the corner and how that could play out. That was sort of the fundamental turn of that game, and Madsen did what he could to put himself into a position to get lucky, but the game was just a bit out of reach.
Lair is going to sideboarding. A lot of really normal kind of main deckable cards in Burkhart's sideboard, which is kind of a cool aspect of the composition. What do you think he's reaching for here against Boros Energy?
Like you said, a lot of these just sort of look like normal cards, right? That's something that we've joked about. I would guess Nile Spellbomb is actually a card that's kind of interesting here, where we saw Cling to Dust specifically do a lot of great work against Flage. I think Flage is one of the cards that Burkhart has front of mind, highest impact threat, thing that he's not really going to be good at just powering through a lot of the time. Having a low opportunity cost way to check it in a longer game as threats get worse is going to be huge for him.
I want to call attention to something really quick here. Players have exchanged physical decks. This is a closed deckless tournament. My read is that these are very serious competitive players. They are preparing for an upcoming open deckless regional championship.
Oh.
Really cool to see this happening in the event here.
Wow. I mean, this is something actually in the finals of the regional championship in Charlotte just a couple of months ago. We also saw Corey Burkhart, Jesse Robkin in the finals. Right, both they had just secured Worlds invitations. They were playing for the trophy for like 10 grand. Sideboarding face up.
Love it.
This is something where I think Corey in particular, real, we've talked about student of the game. It's something, a buzzword we've said a couple of times. This is something where both of these players are not saying, no, I don't want to bob and weave. I don't want to try and zig while you zag or something like that. I want to be better than you. I want to prove that I am the best at Magic. I want to improve. What do you say? Like, how often do I get to play against someone else who's finals to Pro Tour?
Benton Madsen, also very much a student of the game. Pretty varied sideboard here for Madsen. Anything standing out as a possible answer to this Grixis deck?
In general, I think a lot of what he's going to do is just try and make his threats a little bit more resilient wherever that's possible. I think you could maybe end up seeing cards that help him posture for a longer game or maybe disrupt the sideboard a little bit. But for the most part, I don't think he has a ton to change up his game that much. I could see him trying to maybe get cheeky with something like Magus of the Moon to just say, hey, you got to respect this. Good luck. But I think most of these cards are trying to check unfair strategies, and I think his deck is built under the assumption that Boros Energy is pretty reasonable most of the time playing in a fair game of Magic.
Yeah, you have to imagine something Madsen was looking at in Burkhart's deck list was the basic land count when it comes to cards like Blood Moon.
Right.
We'll see if that comes into play, though. If you're watching us here at home, we really thank you for tuning in. And we also want to thank our sponsors this weekend, Beckett and Dragon Shield. Thank you so much for helping to make this event possible, for making this broadcast possible, so everyone at home can come and enjoy this tournament with us. Dragon Shields, that's my brand.
Right, it's one of those things where a lot of times, whatever you have to get a little meta about it, whatever you have to thank the sponsors and stuff, you think, oh, okay, cool, no, I really appreciate this. But these brands in particular are ones that I've been using. I remember reading Beckett Magazine back in the day. I still use Dragon Shields today. I've been using something made by one of these companies for, gosh, 20 years, 25 years at this point. They make it easy, and they're keeping tabletop Magic alive.
I had to pick myself up a little bit. I started to turn to dust as you said that timeline, but that is just true.
All right, both of us were 20, and then both of us kind of had the, don't say the 5.
No.
Don't say the 5.
The 2 is bad enough. But no, you and I, we did a little cubing at a local restaurant last night. The cube safely protected from the drinks on the table in some black matte Dragon Shields.
Listen, I have thousands of their Poppy Fields art sleeves for all of my cubes. The best picture sleeves you can get. I cannot say enough nice things about them. And you know, we talked a little bit going into the match about Benton making the finals of a Pro Tour, right? That was all we won, falling to Reed Duke in the finals, having a great meta call for that event. Corey Burkhart's no slouch, right? We've talked about the finals appearance just a couple of months ago at a regional championship. Also won the America's Players Tour event. That was sort of a Pro Tour equivalent right before the pandemic. Beat Hall of Famer William Jensen in the finals, and that was with the Demir Inverter deck on the weekend, which is one of the hardest decks that I've ever had to play in Constructed Magic.
No kidding. A very fun deck to cover, actually. You and I talking about 2020 in this very building.
Literally this room.
Yeah, we covered a lot of Demir Inverter and Pioneer. Very skill testing deck, and Corey Burkhart bringing a Grixis Midrange deck, trying to tackle the format with controlling elements. That takes a lot of courage.
It's someone where, in a lot of ways, it's just a real love of the game situation where I think there's this sort of balance you want to strike where, yes, I can just play the best deck every single time because I want to be the best, but also it's a game and you want to enjoy yourself and you want to play it your way, and that's what Burkhardt is doing.
Absolutely. Players underway here for game number 2. Madsen on the play. Going to fetch up a basic plains for this turn 1 Guide of Souls. Indicative of some possible Blood Moon, Megas of the Moons on the horizon. Scalding Tarn for Burkhardt. We'll find out before too long how highly he is going to value fetching out this 1 basic island and 1 basic swamp in the deck.
I feel like we are going to see something like that. Well, not a basic swamp off a Scalding Tarn.
Right. No immediacy on the basic swamp for sure, and no immediacy on any basic lands as we see the Scalding Tarn finding something to cast a lightning bolt on the Guide of Souls. That's going to be a Steam Vents because there's no Blood Crypt. Foreshadowing from earlier. Burkhardt to 17.
You know, if foreshadowing's so good, why haven't they made a 5 shadowing?
Great question. I think it's coming up though.
Okay, cool.
Basic Mountain for Madsen and just going to pass.
It's not that surprising. I think post-board you're going to see players happier to keep hands that are built on the back of 3 drops.
Sure. The aforementioned Blood and Megas of the Moon.
Right.
Here is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. That's a good 3-drop. Underselling it a little, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it is really nice. It is a card that kind of cycles in and out of Modern as things progress. It's telling to me that Madsen has so many sort of linear sideboard cards with all of these Fable of the Mirror Breakers in the deck.
Kind of the ideal answer for Burkhardt. Here's Counterspell proper. Going to be cast off of a Watery Grave, fetched up. Burkhardt to 14. Has not prioritized those basic lands just yet. Makes you wonder if A, there's not much more in the way of lands in hand, or B, there is much more in the way of counterspells.
Yeah, I think something that you'll see a good chunk of the time from players in Modern is you either respect the Blood Moon or you don't, right? And especially in a world where you're seeing a lot of counterspells in Corey's hand, fetching a swap is just not a solution.
Right.
Especially without a 3rd land.
Right, no 3rd land, but here is Psychic Frog. Looking forward to hearing that all weekend.
Really?
Yes.
Aw.
Back to Madsen. What can you do about this frog? Gonna be a decent amount of cards in hand for Burkhardt. Makes red removal tough.
And you can tell, is Madsen gonna say, all right, discard 2 cards?
As here is Flage. Looks like 5 cards in Burkhardt's hand.
2 spell bombs.
Nice. Gotta imagine we're targeting the frog as Burkhardt lines up cards to discard.
Hey, at this phase of the game, it's possible you want to put a premium on pressuring Burkhardt's life total, but I think we're still at the phase of the game where players are posturing for threats and cards.
Right. Tameo and Lightning Bolt discarded. Madsen has a follow-up, but it's not a Galvanic Discharge. It's a Regavan.
And this 3/4 frog really threatening to go to work.
Yes, indeed. Here is that Nile Spellbomb.
And now there's this interesting sort of game where Burkhardt has to figure out, do I want to block Ragavan? Do I maybe want to crack Spellbomb now to dig for a land? There are a lot of ways that Burkhardt can play from here.
And just like you said, aggressive activation of the Spellbomb. Going to use that black mana to draw a card.
I like this line from Corey because it also informs if he wants to attack.
Yeah, that makes sense. And he decides he does not.
Well, Madsen doesn't either.
Well, Madsen, that would be a clearly bad attack, so that one makes sense to me.
Listen. I'm in the booth. They've been to the finals of Pro Tours, so...
Orcish Bowmaster. Woof, that's going to go after the Regavan. Reprieve, though. Actually, it's not going to go after the Regavan.
Okay, that's out of the sideboard. I think Remand in this sort of Remand effect in this sort of matchup when you're on the play makes a lot of sense.
Definitely. And in this game with Burkhardt light on lands is pretty effective.
Right, I think this is a situation where it's really nice for the games where Madsen has a 1-drop and then is able to hold back a Frog or a Bowmasters on 2 as the follow-up. I think that's really nice. Just real, shows that Madsen has a macro idea of how he wants these post-board games to play out.
What is tough, though, is there was no answer for this Frog here. Regiman just hanging out. Fatal Push takes care of it, and now the Frog can freely attack, and this is where the advantage starts to compound in Burkhart's direction, drawing a card there.
Right, where I think this is the spot where Madsen really needs to get on the table or answer this Frog. Ideally both, of course, but this is the spot where if Madsen bricks for another turn, I think this game is really, really at risk of slipping away from him.
Some help on that front as an elegant parlor is fetched up. Madsen at least gets to surveil before going to work on the following turn.
I mean, there is a point where if this were to flip over something like a Flage, there is an Arena of Glory on the table.
Yes. Currently 3 cards in the graveyard. Need a little bit more help from there, but it starts to line up.
All right, well, it wasn't a Flage.
It is one that Madsen's thinking about. I think this is one of those situations where it is obviously not the answer to this battlefield on this turn.
Right. This is the spot where Madsen's having to basically map out, okay, let's assume that Burkhardt untaps with this Frog again. What do the games I win look like? Does this card contribute to that game? And he decides it does.
And we'll see what it is. Fabled Mirror Breaker.
Worst things to draw.
Yes.
I think we can assume that that was the pickup here, given it was not cast last turn.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Here is Goblin Shaman, and there is a Johnny.
So this is at least going to force Burkhardt to start exiling cards from graveyard to jump the Frog, but I have a feeling Burkhardt really does not mind doing that.
Yeah, pretty stocked graveyard on Burkhardt's side of things. Already 8 cards there. We also know that Burkhardt's hand is all gas.
Right, yeah. Whenever your mid-range opponent is just missing land drops and has 3-ish lands, you kind of have this, give me a break.
Right.
Come on.
Especially when one of your turns was missing plays.
Exactly. You're just like, wait, assuming all of our cards trade 1 for 1, I'm down this many resources?
Here is Orcish Bowmaster. It's going to go after Cat Token. Madsen now has the question, do I want to transform my Ajani?
Ooh,
Not that
nice.
appealing against a Psychic Frog, is it?
No. I believe Psychic Frog, that it does say our Planeswalker. It does say our Planeswalker.
It would be bad enough if it just attacked the Ajani to death, but I believe you are right that it would draw a card as well.
Yeah, I don't know who put Or Planeswalker on that card, but I think they deserve a very strong talking to.
I think Corey Burkhardt probably give him some praise. No transformation on the Ajani. A lowly Squire at this point. As here comes the Psychic Frog.
All right, 3 of them, no jumping.
You can block if you want to.
Okay, is this Goblin Shaman a friend of Corey's? This is interesting, right? Because Corey is just saying, you know, I like drawing cards, but I kind of think your Goblin Shaman or your Ajani is worth more than a random card off the top of my deck in 3 life.
Right.
So this is a spot where it's pretty loud to me that Burkhardt is just simply trying to shrink the battlefield at the moment. Generally in a mid-range fight, whenever you are ahead on the board, it's a spot where it is better for you to shrink how many game pieces there are on the battlefield, because that means each individual resource is worth more, or at least carries more of the game on its back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Madsen does throw the Ajani under the Frog.
And this is the way that Frog kills Ajani, but Burkhardt doesn't get to draw a card about it.
Right. Here's Basic Island and Nihil Spellbomb. Fable's going to go to Chapter 2. And that Orcish Bowmaster is once again in play. So even if there were a Flage, it's not going to be that easy.
It's so strange how it almost feels like a lock piece.
Right.
But in a different way. Like normally Orcish Bowmaster is the turn off your card draw spells way. But here it's oh no, this will create a trigger, so good luck.
definitely feels very deliberate on Burkhart's part. You know, I'm seeing this interaction for the first time. He's not.
No, absolutely not. No, one of the strengths of Flage in this Boros energy deck that Madsen's brought generally is that you have these sort of, I don't want to say priority tricks, but you are insulated a bit by the rules of Magic where you're probably going to get to engage with your Flage at some point. But Burkhart paying a ton of respect to Flage itself with a bunch of ways to check the graveyard and really say, no, I have actually realized that's the way that I lose games most often, and I'm willing to pay a lot of respect to that end.
I love that approach from Burkhart. Certainly lines up with my experience. We do see a rummage here. Just one card.
1 damage to Madsen. Little bit of life.
A little bit of work. Blood Moon, okay. Turns off the black mana.
Now this is a spot where I think Burkhart wants to figure out if it's time to cash in Nile Spellbomb.
Right. If you want to draw the card, your black mana is going away, but you do still maintain that Tormod's Crypt effect if you don't.
Yeah, this is exactly what we were talking about a second ago. This is a lot of respect being paid to Flage specifically by saying, no, I don't want one card. I don't want Flage to become part of this game.
Love it, especially with the active Frog. That call by Burkhart just looks right to me. Guide of Souls shows up for Madsen, and we go back Burkhart's way.
So at this point, Madsen is not out of this. He has 15 life to play with.
2 cards discarded to the Frog. Burkhart lining up a 3-turn clock here with the Frog itself, as that's going to jump as well.
Oh, I love this attack with the army.
What are armies for? Going to war.
Ooh, I'm using that one.
You're welcome.
That's good, clean living.
The army is going to trade with the Goblin Shaman. We've seen that before. Psychic Frog also chunking in for 5 and a card. We're going to see that one again, I'm sure.
And this is Madsen saying, no, I just need a couple more turns to stabilize. Guide of Souls plus Reflection of Kiki-Jiki is a lot of life and a lot of damage.
Yes. So here comes that Reflection. Guide of Souls going to gain a life, going to make an energy.
Having a way to produce extra energy also just makes Madsen's Galvanic Discharges off the top stronger, which I understand feels a little bit like reading the cards to you, but right now there aren't that many individual cards that Madsen has access to that are able to check this Psychic Frog. In a lot of ways, it just feels like Madsen is drawing to that end.
Yeah, really good shout. The Discharge is not a clean answer to the Frog at this stage in the game, but the Guide could help to get it there. Here's an attack by Goddess Hollows. Here is Snapcaster Mage. Going to target a Lightning Bolt in the graveyard.
Oh, what year is it?
Goodbye, Guide of Souls. Lightning Bolt also says goodbye, Reflection.
I feel like that might be the house of cards for Madsen.
Yeah, we might be saying goodbye, Benton Madsen, in short order as we go back to Corey Burkhart.
Six of them.
Psychic Frog, Orcish Bowmaster. They're going to rumble across.
Ooh, two more.
Discards. A land and an uncastable Cling to Dust. That makes sense. Frog connects for 7.
I mean, this is that fungibility that I was talking about earlier, where those cards were dead. And instead, they are 2 points of damage, which over 2 turns is 4 points of damage.
Once again, we see this Desperation Dast Ragavan. Looks like it's connecting. Burkhart to 12. We need a good hit here. It's Scalding Tarn. That is not it. And Benton Madsen has to pick him up. Corey Burkhart making quick work of Benton Madsen's Boros energy deck. Definitely something he was targeting with this Grixis Midrange deck, and so far so good. Corey Burkhart